Thank you so much, everyone. What a great place to be. What an amazing breakfast. Thank you, everyone, for coming to listen to my talk. So I think it's a great move on from what Chris was just talking about the engine, but what's the content that we feed into that engine, right? And so I'll talk about one of the early startups that I worked at in London called Bloom & Wild. It was a tech-enabled flower business, and I was running the marketing team, the brand team, and from time to time, I was called in to do floristry events. I'm not a florist, but how many of us have gotten stuck in really early stage doing something that we have no idea how to do? And so I was pulling together bouquets, sending them to journalists, and doing it with office scissors. Now, if you guys know, using office scissors to cut paper or to cut flowers typically damages things. It doesn't move you forward. And it's an analogy for really what I call drag. So many of you in this room have amazing products, but you're using the wrong tool to sell the products that you have. So you might be sitting in a meeting where, your sales pipeline feels a bit slow, your ads aren't working, like something is pulling the team back. And what I found is that if you have the right toolkit, which I'll walk through today, then you can make progress, you can cut sharper and cleaner. What I discovered very quickly is that Japanese floristry scissors were the way forward. Longer handle for leverage, more grip, shorter, sharper blade. And so as we go through this presentation, think about your toolkit for leveraging stronger positioning so that you can cut sharper and cleaner, have more leverage in your conversations, and pitch at the right moment. So I'll cut one thing off at the pass. This is not a presentation about rebranding your company. Now, I'm a reformed brand strategist. I spent the first 5 years of my life in New York City working at some of the top branding agencies. But after going in-house in tech businesses and repositioning some of Europe's unicorns, this is not about changing your logo. This is about understanding your customer incredibly deeply. This is about understanding the catalyst for what gets them to purchase, the category that they look for your product in. Chris just talked about that with project management software. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then finally, how do you show up to connect with the identity of your customer? So really, what we're going to talk through today is a behavior change toolkit. Every morning that you wake up, 45% of your day is already planned for you. It's routine. We have the same breakfast, same coffee, we start off our day in the same way. We're creatures of habit. And so often, we are not competing against our competitors. You are competing against getting people outside their habits. So I'll get you to think about something as we go through this presentation. I want you to take 10 seconds, write down the last thing that you bought, write down your last big purchase. Take a second, I'll let you jot it down. 200 euros or greater, might look like something like this. Might be software, might be a bike, might be a car, might be something that you decided you needed in your life. I want you to reflect on that purchase throughout this presentation so that you can psychoanalyze yourself like you'd think about some of your customers. So we'll start off with Catalyst, but these are the three things that we'll talk about today where positioning gives you an advantage in the market. So as we move into Catalyst, the first case study that I'll take you through is about finding your pitch window. So in that 45% example of us just going through the motions every day, we take that into consideration. 95% of your outbound is hitting people in their routine. They're not interested in having a conversation to see a demo. How many of you have jumped on a sales call to pitch a demo and people are just not interested? They don't want something that's all in one. They don't want something that might move their deal flow faster. They just want something that's going to make their life a lot easier in some particular way. So you need to understand what's the moment where people start changing their habits, start changing their identity, start changing their thinking. This is the tipping point to which somebody will engage in a conversation with you. So the first case study I'll walk through was one of my clients that launched in 2021. They're called Incident.io. How many of you have used incident management software? Oh, just one, two. Okay, amazing. So they launched in 2021 as modern on-call, and they had a Slack plugin that would go into the organization, and they were pitching to midweight to senior software engineers. Some of them had budget, some of them didn't, and those engineers were looking for a better on-call experience. How many of you have been on call? It sucks. And so their pitch was picking up the phone, talking to their network, doing everything that Chris was saying, showing up everywhere in the engineering community to help engineers have better workflow, right? They wanted to modernize a really bad experience, which is being on call. Your payments are down, your website's crashed, something is failing you. And so what they found, though, that they were pitching a vitamin, not a painkiller. So for the engineer, they wanted a better workflow. A workflow that is much better is not, in fact, an executive team having a PR incident, a comms crisis, and an organization that's spending the entire weekend trying to solve a problem in the business. Now, when the midweight to senior engineer would go to the exec team and say, hey, I need a few £1,000s to pay for this Slack plugin, for this modern on-call, for this different version of PagerDuty, they were often met with, well, but you've got something that works already. Why do we change it, right? We've got that habit that's already formed, that cost that's already in the P&L. Why do we need to change things? And so what we realized is that we needed a different catalyst moment that wasn't just somebody who wanted to improve their workflow. We needed to target an executive team that had a really bad weekend. This is the kind of incident that we needed to follow. And like Chris was talking about building agents that help you find situations where your customers or your prospects are being let down, there's so many simple ways to mine the catalyst moment for your customer. So take a moment and think about how you can actually use agents today to understand where people are disappointed, where people's systems have let them down. And so this became a fundamental part of their go-to-market strategy. Find the executive team that had had a bad weekend, find the organization that had a comms crisis, figure out the organization that had a really bad PagerDuty experience where the software wasn't actually delivering for them. And so the conversation changed for every single sales meeting. It was no longer about, can I show you a demo of our Slack plugin, Incident.io? It was, tell me about your last bad incident. And that reframed the conversation, because instead of talking about your product and saying, let me show you what we do, it refocused the conversation around the customer and their issues, their pain points, their catalysts, the thing that they were struggling with the most. And it opened up a psychologically secure conversation for that potential customer to talk about potential features that Incident could build, problems that they could solve, which led them straight into the perfect pitch moment to sell them the system. And so there's simple ways to use AI to mine the data that you have, your sales calls, exactly what Chris was saying on his slides, build agents to start mining this information, but also at the same time, I do believe in the old school way of just picking up the phone to your prospects, right? People who've signed up that have not converted, people who've signed up in the last 5 to 10 days, there's something that they're trying to understand, they're trying to figure out how to solve. Flip the table round. Instead of saying, can I show you a demo, ask them, what did you come here to fix? What did you think that you could achieve by having a conversation with us? And then when we go back to the 45% of our day is just routine, we have to understand that we're looking for triggers that happen within organizations. I know some of this sounds very simple, but there's ways to find out online how people are cost-cutting, whether or not they're doing a reorg. Chris just talked about some of that today. And so where are there then opportunities for you to sell, for you to bring your product in to solve a problem that they now have? And so these are some examples of catalyst moments, but having conversations tends to be the best place to find them. So moving through the incident example, we'll talk about, if you're in the supermarket, you have a shopping list, you have a context of a kid's birthday party, you're going to the baking aisle or you're going to the ready cake aisle, you are not going to the cereal aisle, right? So how do you show up in a place where people can actually find you? Now, Incident's first pitch in 2021 was Modern On Call. It was a Slack plugin. Slack plugins sound pretty cheap, don't they? A year later, after we repositioned the business, they raised $28 million with a $350 million valuation, but that was not on a Slack plugin. Their clients are now Etsy, Ramp, and Netflix, and they weren't going to get there by positioning themselves in this way. So one of the founders was constantly doing demo videos showing how simple and easy it was to use, positioned to engineers. We knew that we needed to change that pitch to exec teams because a Slack integration was fundamentally the wrong shopping aisle. This was something that maybe an engineer was looking for, but not an exec team that's looking to reframe how a company solves incidents and how they bounce back better every time. Because all of us will break things in an organization. Incidents will happen, but we needed to change how they thought about pitching it and which aisle they were shopping in. So what the engineer was asking for was a better version of PagerDuty. What teams bought was one place to fight the fire, one place to learn from it, one place to get better every single time that they were building back stronger after each and every one of those incidents. Because it's not just an engineering problem when you solve an incident. It's a company-wide problem. It's a PR problem. It's a marketing problem. You're sending out emails when your systems have failed. You're triaging with crisis communications when things have failed. And actually, what we started to do, we started to list out all of the cost centers that cross-category we could steal market share from, right? If you start listing out the adjacent ways of solving problems, so how much does a post-mortem cost your business? How much does building a Slack bot internally cost your business, or now an AI tool? PagerDuty, lost engineering hours, lost consumer trust, like a crisis PR agency in the United States will cost you $250K per crisis. So we looked at our category, which at the time was a Slack integration, or Modern On-Call. We shifted that to look at the full end-to-end stack of how people were solving the problem at the time. These are all of the alternative solutions, and it was a mess. And so we reframed it as an end-to-end incident management platform. Sounds very simple, but we are often trying to find ways to explain our category that is more clever than what people are really searching for. And this is where the customer conversations become really important. Most people don't know what on-call is. Ask a crisis comms person, ask a CMO. Some will know in a software business. But what we needed to communicate was that incidents will happen, and you need an end-to-end place to solve them. That is not a mess of software and a stack that is costing you hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so we shifted from individual buyers replacing a feature where it's just paperwork and workflow. That was a pain for the software engineer. Moving to enterprise teams, a team-wide buyer, a whole stack that was replaced, an entire workflow with a pain that was visible at the exec and board level. How much do you think that product cost versus that product? I'll give you another example of a category reframe that changes pricing. It has nothing to do with software. So one of my clients now is a non-alcoholic aperitif. At face value, if you look at that product in a glass with ice versus a juice, one costs 12 pounds per serve, one costs 4 pounds. If you think about the context in which your product is showing up and the name that you give it, you can demand a much higher price premium for what you're selling. That's really important, and you can also expand your addressable market It's not to say that there aren't enough software engineers at a low ticket cost, but if you can sign enterprise deals, then it makes a meaningful difference. So we went from a £5,000 ticket to a £500,000 ticket in a year. That's meaningful. So I'll finish up on the last section, which is identity. So most of you here, when you wrote down that last purchase that you made, what did it say about you? What did it say about your value system, what you believe in? That's the important part of this section. And again, I'll remind you, this isn't about visual identity, not fully. This is about how your product behaves, how your product speaks, and how your product shows up. So one of my clients was a company called Chronify. They still exist today. And they had 2 products. And some of you might feel this pain of, well, we have 2 value propositions and we have 2 customers. And the most common question that most of my clients come to me with is, which customer do I focus on? This becomes a really fundamental question. And so they had an API for software engineers for calendar workflows that was pitching to software teams. And then they had a calendar widget for non-technical buyers that were showing up on calls saying, how are you different to Calendly? Are you better than Calendly? Are you worse? Are you HIPAA compliant? And so it started getting into feature creep. And we then started to look at, what's the target addressable market? And how do we think about our brand and how we show up? They had this sort of aquamarine color, and you can see here at conferences, they were pitching to the calendar widget buyers over here. So scheduling any interview type without back and forth. Sounds table stakes in today's environment. And we forgot that they had excellent product market fit on the API products. That was meaningful. That was really good data that we needed to think about as we built the identity. And so we then started to unpick these 2 archetypes, these 2 people. What do they care about? What do they connect with? What were their value systems aligned to? One that was focused on compliance. Well, so do we build the product around compliance? Is that what we stand for? Is that what we need to show up with codes and language and symbols for? Or is it for infrastructure builders, so people who really care about the platform layer? And those were our API buyers. And what we found is that actually we were pitching the widget as a widget, so it was in the wrong category. But actually, when we started talking to engineers about the product, they said, well, the API is great, but what I really need is product workflow and infrastructure. And we said, okay, this is interesting here. So it's not a widget, it's infrastructure, it's workflow. So we shifted the category. And then very quickly, when we realized that we did need to change the look and feel of the brand, we knew that we could actually shift from recruiters and researchers being the buyer of the widget to our existing audience. It was engineers and platform PMs. And so the Calendly question started disappearing because we were extending our market through an existing customer that already knew and understood our value proposition, but by reframing the category of our other products and services, we knew that when we got to a visual change, we could actually connect visually and verbally with the right words and the right symbols around platform infrastructure versus this teal look and feel with, we didn't really understand what the logo was at the time, but something that could actually connect with our audience that made sense. I'll give you another example. How many of you in this room use Jira? How many of you in this room use Linear? Okay. We'll get the Jira and the Linear people together to talk about their roles. But if you look at Jira at face value, they're selling to product managers or project managers. So people who want customizability, who want endless configurations, right? That is what their TV ads are selling. It's what their product is about. It takes days of onboarding and training and getting to understand how to use the product. Now, if you're using Linear, you believe that there's one way to build software. Linear, you sign up, you get going, there's very little training. It's for craftspeople who believe in a certain way of building. And so fundamentally, that has nothing to do with visual identity. It's about really understanding who you're for, how your content shows up, how your product shows up, and which tribe you are building a product for. And so fundamentally, when you're having your customer conversations, you can go outside the box a little bit. You can say, what do you actually value? How do you believe that you should be doing X, Y, and Z as it relates to your product? Understand their opinions. Understand the polarities of their opinions. Understand what other products and services they buy, because what you'll start to cobble together visually and verbally is a language that helps you build products for the right people. And so this is one example of how does the product actually manifest as a very different experience that has nothing to do with visual identity. And you can see from the clients that each brand is attracting. One brand is attracting the AI businesses of this world that are growing at a much quicker pace than some of the bigger corporates that are using Jira. And so we think about this, well, we actually don't think about this. So when we go in our day-to-day, if we bring this back to really basic products, you go into a shop, you choose a soft drink or a bottle of water. What does it say about your identity? My French husband will only choose Evian. Right, what does it say about his identity? If you're at a bar in Colorado and you don't drink, you're going to choose Liquid Death. What does that say about your identity? Do you buy Patagonia? Do you have a mountain bike? Understanding those worlds of your customer is really important, because then when you do get onto building a visual identity, or you're thinking about your tone and your messaging, you know exactly what to pitch and how. So think about the thing that you wrote down. Look back at it. What was changing in your life when you bought that thing? Think about what happened. And that's a great question to ask your customers when you're getting on the phone with them. So a prospect signs up to use your product. Instead of saying, what can I tell you about X? You say, what was happening in your life when you signed up? Walk me through that step by step. What was hurting? What was feeling good? Walk me through how you felt emotionally and what you were trying to change. And then where else did you search? Try and understand the category, the shopping aisle that they were looking for products and services in that might have been similar to yours. And then try and understand which tribe they feel like they belong to. Is it the, I know this is a stereotype, but is it the outdoorsy person in Colorado, or is it the VC bro in San Francisco? Because those things actually do matter, and it is useful to unpick what someone's beliefs and value systems are that can identify with yours. So with those three things, I'll leave you with some things to do next week. So you can get an agent to do it, but do take the time to listen to your last 5 closed sales calls. Find those catalyst moments, find those triggers and pain points, and use your customer's language when you play that back. You don't need to pay a copywriter to rewrite something that your customer says. I'll say that again. You don't need to pay an expensive copywriter to rewrite your customer's pain points. So when you're listening to those sales calls, write down some of the things that people are saying about what was happening when they started looking for you. Find those moments of change, map adjacent problems, and map adjacent tool stacks. So when we went through the incident example, map out all the other things that they're using that are failing them, because then you can figure out actually where can your product extend, what else do you build, and then how do you talk about it. So audit your category. Are you using the right language? Are you overcomplicating your category and trying to use something that sounds really cool, but actually you should just be saying that you're a platform? And then finally, try and understand the tribe. So I'll leave you with the Japanese floristry scissors. If you're sitting in a meeting with your team and you feel like things are stalling, my number one tip to you is go listen to your last 5 customer calls. Because if you're in that meeting and something's stalling, you're feeling drag. You can use that in your team's language. This is a meeting that's got a lot of drag. So how do we find out how to have a shorter pitch to our customers using the right language, using their language? And with that, I will say goodbye. Thank you very much.